Hello, in this episode we're going to take a look at how you can use Power Automate to automatically refresh your Power BI dataset whenever there is a change to the data source. And we'll use an Excel sheet on SharePoint. So whenever somebody updates that Excel sheet, we want to also automatically update our Power BI report. But before we jump into all the specifics on how to set it up, I want you to make the reflection to see if it is indeed the best option for your use case. So when it comes to refreshing data from online data sources, and especially those ones on SharePoint, for example, the first reflection should always be to take a look at a scheduled refresh to see if that meets your needs. With a scheduled refresh, we can set up to 8 refresh schedules a day with the standard Pro license. So that means if you just take an average business day of 8 hours, you can set a refresh point every hour. So that means that your data at the most is outdated just 1 hour. If that is more than sufficient for what you try to achieve, I would say just go for the scheduled refresh because that is the most convenient and the easiest way to set it up. But if you want to be a little bit closer to those data updates and you want to update that data a little bit faster, then you can take a look at Power Automate, and then whenever there is an update to that underlying data set, to that Excel sheet, it will automatically trigger also a refresh of your Power BI data model. Okay, so let's go to my laptop and see how we can set it up. Okay, so I've already created a test SharePoint site with an Excel sheet in it. Let's open it up and check the contents. So I have a simple table with 3 products and then the sales amount. And then the next step will be to import that data into Power BI. And the easiest way to do that is by getting the URL for that on that Excel sheet on SharePoint Online. And the most convenient way to get that is from the Excel desktop application. So you can either go here to editing and say open in desktop if you already have the Excel sheet open in Excel Online, or if you are on the SharePoint list of the files, you can click on the 3-dotted icon and then go to open in app. This will open up the Excel desktop application. I have my dataset in there. And then we go to File, Info, and then click on Copy Path. So this will copy the URL pointing to that particular file into our clipboard. I'll go to Power BI and then click on Get Data. And you would be tempted to go for the Excel workbook because it's actually an Excel that we are connecting to, but it's an Excel on SharePoint Online. And to connect to that type of resource, we actually need to have the web connector. So it was get data web, and then we paste that URL that we have just copied from Excel desktop in there. So Control V, and then we need to make one slight change. So here on the right, you can see question mark web equals 1 at the end of the URL that we need to remove. So remove the question mark web equals 1. So you go to get data and you would be tempted to pick the Excel workbook, but it's an Excel on SharePoint Online. And to connect to this type of resource, we actually need to have the web connector. So it's get data and then web. And then we do Control V, so we paste that URL that we have just copied from the Excel desktop application in there. And then we need to make one small change. So here at the end, you can see question mark web equals 1 that we need to remove so that we get a clean URL pointing to that Excel sheet. So remove the question mark with web equals 1. Click on OK. Now it's gonna ask us to authenticate against that online file. And we're gonna do that with our organizational account. Click on sign in. I'll select my current user. Click on connect. Then we have our sheet 1 containing our table, and we'll load it in our Power BI file. Okay, our sheet has loaded. So let's just visualize the data to see if everything is correct. I'll put in our products and our sales data in a simple table. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Next step will be to publish the Power BI report. So let's click on publish so that we can make it available in the Power BI Online service. I'll name it Power Automate and save it. Pick our workspace. I have created a Power Automate workspace where we can store that Power BI file. Now it's publishing to the online service. And let's take a look if everything has correctly arrived. We go to our Power Automate workspace, and then we can see that our report is there and we have that data. So far we have connected to our Excel sheet on SharePoint Online. We've published the report, but now we of course need to create that trigger for that data refresh. And we will use Power Automate instead of just using the scheduled refresh. But still, if we want to make it happen, we first need to click on the schedule refresh. And I'll show you immediately why that's important. Because we have entered our credentials in the desktop application, but they are not transferred to the online service. You can see here there is a warning message stating that it has failed to test the connection to the data source. So we need to click on Edit Credentials and make sure that the online service can also connect to our Excel sheet on SharePoint. As an authentication method, we're going to pick OAuth 2. Privacy level I'm not gonna set, and then click on sign in. And then just like with the authentication in the desktop, in Power BI desktop, we're gonna pick our user account. If you are in a production environment, it might be a better practice to use a service account, but here I'll just use my own user to connect to it. And now that connection is set, if we want to validate that everything is working correctly, then we can also trigger a manual refresh. So I'll click here on refresh now. It starts loading. The refresh has completed. There will not be a change in my report because the data has not changed, but it's just to test the connection. If we then go back to scheduled refresh and click on the refresh history, you can see I have an on-demand refresh and it has successfully completed. So now we're sure that the Power BI online service can connect to our data source. And then we go into the final step of the whole process, and that is to set the automated trigger. So whenever there is a change to that Excel workbook, I want to make sure that my Power BI semantic model is also updated. And that we're going to do with Power Automate. To go to Power Automate, if you are in any Office application, you can click on that menu icon and go here to Power Automate. Or you can also type in the URL directly. It's make.powerautomate.com. So make.powerautomate.com, and there you can set all your automations. Once you are in Power Automate, you go to My Flows. So this is where you can configure all the different types of automations. I don't have any flows configured yet, so I'll start with a new flow. Click here on New Flow, and then there are a couple of options available. So you can either start from a template, and you can see some of those templates here already. So templates are some predefined automations, some logic steps that have been pre-created for you. And it's always a good practice to take a look at the template and search for it. Maybe somebody has already built that automation. You just need to do some minor configuration, but it's a good way to get started. So don't reinvent the wheel, and first of all, check the templates. If you want to build something custom, you also have some different options available. You have the automated cloud flow, and that is actually the one that we're gonna pick for this particular use case. There you can set a trigger. Whenever there is a certain event happening, it will trigger the execution of that flow. You have instant cloud flows. That is where you click a button to initiate the execution, and then you have scheduled cloud flows. For example, you can execute a flow every day, every minute if you want. You can set your own schedule when it has to be executed. And then you also have desktop flows. That is especially useful when you have legacy applications that are not cloud-based, where it's not possible to connect directly to where you don't have any APIs available. Then you can also use a desktop flow to automate some of the work happening locally on your PC. But for our use case, we're going to use the automated cloud flow. We'll give it a name, so we'll call it Power BI Refresh. And then we need to set a trigger. So when does the flow have to be executed? It's when my Excel workbook on SharePoint Online is updated. So I'll search for any triggers on SharePoint. Let's enter SharePoint. And then here, I think the first one is the one that we want already. So when an item or a file is modified on SharePoint, so I'm gonna select that one, click on Create. And now I have a new flow being created with my first step, which is the trigger of that flow. And there is a little alert saying invalid parameters. So it means that I need to add some configuration. So I need to set the actual site and the library that I want to have monitored for changes. And if I click here, you see there are no items available. So I cannot yet select my site in there. And the reason being is that at the moment, because it's my first flow, Power Automate does not yet have a connection to SharePoint. So it doesn't know how to authenticate against my resources. And you can see that here on the bottom left, so it says not connected. So let's start by setting up that connection. We'll click on Change Connection. And then click on Add New. So that is allowing Power Automate to connect to SharePoint. Click on Sign In. Here as well, I'll sign in with my own user account, but again, if it's a production environment, I would opt for a service account to do that for you. So now it has changed to connected, and then it says with which user account it has made that connection. And if we then expand site address, then you can see the different sites that I have available. So it was my test site where it was located. Then I need to pick my library, which is my documents. And then that configuration is set. So it means that whenever there is a new file or a change to a file in the documents library, it will create a trigger. Something that here you need to be aware of is that it will do it for any file in there. So as a best practice, I would make sure that you have just an individual library for that particular Excel sheet or a particular set of Excel sheets that are tied to that report. Don't mix it up with a lot of other stuff, because that would create a lot of false triggers and use of unnecessary resources. So that's being set. So my trigger is complete. The next step that we need to add is like, what is the thing that we want to have executed. So when a file is modified, I want to update my Power BI semantic model. Let's do a search for Power BI to see what we can find. So what do we have as suggestions here? Exports. So it doesn't look like a refresh of my data set is listed there, but I can see Power BI, and then we're going to click on the See More link. So it has listed, I think, the most common steps available, but it's not including the one that we want to have, so the refresh of a data set. So let's click on see more to see if it's available. Yes, here it is. So let's select refresh a data set. And then just like we did with the SharePoint step, we need to start by creating a connection, so allowing Power Automate to use resources within Power BI. Click on sign in. Select my user account again. Now that connection has been established, you can see it here on the bottom left. We need to select our workspace, so it was the Power Automate workspace, and then select the actual data set that we want to have refreshed, and that was our Power Automate data set. So now everything is in place, and we'll save that flow. Okay. So our flow is ready. So let's take a look and see if we can test that flow and if everything executes fine. So we're going to go to our product sales that we have here. So I'll add a new product D, sale of 4,000. It has saved those changes. And then we'll go back here. There is a test button there, but of course the trigger needs to happen. And then here you can see the run history. So we have made that change. So that means that that event has happened. You don't immediately see a change here, and I'll show you why. If you go back to your flow and you click on that SharePoint trigger and expand here the bottom option, you can see how often do you want to check for items, and there is an interval here of 1 minute. You can change it, you can increase the frequency or decrease it. I would not go like too fast with the intervals, because that would also consume a lot of resources. Just take something that is sensible. 1 minute is more than enough for my particular use case. So that means there might be a it means that there might be a small delay between the moment that you have updated your Excel workbook and when it is visible here in the run history. You can click on refresh to see when it has executed. I can see here there has been an execution of that particular flow. If you want to see the details, for example, if there was a failure, but also when it's successful, we can check the details, click on that execution, and then you get more detailed steps in there. Usually you will only go in there if you want to troubleshoot if there was somehow an error, then you can see more detailed information here as well. Let's check in Power BI if everything is now correctly updated. So we're going to go here to Power BI, go back to our workspace. We have our semantic model. Go to the scheduled refresh. So it's not on a schedule yet. You can see it here on the refresh schedule. There is nothing set, so it's not enabled. But if we go to refresh history, then you can see that it has executed that refresh through the API. So there's Power Automate that is triggering that refresh through the Power BI API. And then if we go to our actual report to see if the changes have been correctly applied, let's open it up. And then you can see that my product D is here as well. Something to keep in mind when you are first setting this up and testing it, when you make changes in your Excel sheet. So for example, if I type here product E and then I type in my sales amount, if you have watched closely, that saved step here has executed 2 or 3 times. So whenever I'm like creating new data in there, it's not doing that periodically, it's almost instantaneously. So it's something to keep in mind that it will now already execute a trigger for my product E and then do a next one for that. So there might also be a bit of a delay when it becomes available. So if you have a lot of changes, it will fire that trigger multiple times and it gets queued up a little bit. So that sometimes when you are then immediately checking your Power BI report, you don't see those changes yet because it's still processing all those different things that you have updated. So I think this method of using Power Automate to trigger that refresh works best when you, for example, periodically upload a new version of that Excel sheet. It doesn't work that well if you have an Excel sheet where people are continuously making updates, because it will fire that trigger so many times that it's not really workable. So it's more for a periodic update. Somebody uploads a new version of that workbook from their computer to that SharePoint site, and then through Power Automate, Power BI will pick it up. Thanks for watching. I hope you got some value from it, and see you in the next episode.